where they're going to change. Maybe overnight there could be some sort of agreement where we can get consensus. But I do want the committee to understand what's at stake a little better. So I asked Damien to prepare a chart around the infamous matrix, because I don't, it takes some digging in this area. Unfortunately, it's very weedy to understand in terms of employers and tax rates, how important or unimportant tax relief is in this context. So I wanted Damien to pull up some examples for folks. We heard one very large savings that was given to us by the department. I think they said their changes were going to save a business $115,000, but they admitted that it was an extremely large business.
Right.
I don't know what their payroll was, but I wanted to show small businesses, average sized businesses, big businesses, what's at stake here and what, the direction I'm hoping we're going to go, where we are going to give this relief to business, how much they're going to get in the near term, certainly. So, Damon, can you pull up your chart? Welcome, Commissioner. I'm sorry if there was a miscommunication on the timing, but we're just getting started anyhow.
Not a problem.
Okay.
Sure. So let me get the
So while you're doing
shared here.
Is it possible, Damien, for you to, is it a chart you can email to us, or is it easier just to share it? Oh God, it's so tiny. Okay.
It's funny that you ask, because I just emailed it to you, Senator Clarkson.
Oh, darling, you are just so on top of it. You know your committee well.
So just to back up for the commissioner's benefit, I just took 30 seconds to say what I asked Damien to do. I think because this is so complicated, I wanted to put some perspective on the tax contribution side, at least what it means to employers to give this relief, how much they could save, whether it's a small employer or a big employer, and per employee, because I think we see all kinds of numbers all over the place and people don't necessarily drill it down to the average storefront. So I asked him to do that, which I think is probably down at the bottom of this chart he's now posting.
Yes. So the chart here kind of breaks out three things. So the first is, if you remember Matt Barowitz's side by side presentation on the base contributions, the contributions under the administration's proposal, and the contributions.
David, can I interrupt you for a second?
Sure.
Before we go to the issue of help to workers and help to employers, I really want to focus on what I was talking about. What is the individual impact of the tax changes on individual businesses? And I thought we would have the infamous matrix up there with the 20 grids.
Oh, you want the matrix up? Sure.
And then the examples where we land in that matrix, because that's what I wanted to start talking about. And then we'll get to the other, the summary of the proposals that are out there.
Sure. Let me just pull up the handout I did on the UI tax schedules for the committee. I will get that up. And
so not Matt's schedule.
Yep, I put together a handout that just makes it easier to read the statute, and we discussed it a few weeks back now. I can't remember when, but it is posted to the committee's website a few weeks back.
Right.
I'll send another copy to Nathan so that he can post it for today. And I'm sorry, my connection to the State House computer network this morning is extremely delayed, so it's just taking a minute for that document to open. So I'm not sure what's happening with
Yep.
our servers this morning, but it is creating delays on my end. So the document is opening. It's just taking a minute. But let's see.
So while that's going, hopefully I won't confuse things, but what I'm hoping we can learn from this chart or this matrix is you will see the varying percentage rates of taxes multiplied by the taxable wage base, which is, I think, 14,001 for each employee. And you can see what the taxes would be if we don't pass anything and what they would be if we pass the rate relief proposal we're talking about, and how that would be maybe a few $100s to a very small employer, to many thousands of dollars to a very large employer. But I struggle with it sometimes. So I can imagine that a lot of committee just, they see $36 million here. Yeah. What does that mean on the street to people?
Okay, so it is just come up for me. So I'll start with the matrix with all the tax rates, and then I'm going to shift over to an example of what the impact would be for an employer in rate class 0, which is these are the employers who have not had layoffs or non-COVID related layoffs in their experience in the last 3 years, which Cameron testified was the most significant group of employers there. I can't remember the exact percentage. Maybe the commissioner remembers that off the top of his head. But as you can see here, that rate class 0 runs from 0.4% at Schedule 1 all the way up to 1.3%. If you get into the higher rates, everything rises as you go down the rate classes until you're at rate class 20, where the lowest rate at Schedule 1 is 5.4% and the highest rate at Schedule 5 is 8.4%. And those employers in the Schedule 20 or the class 20 bucket are the employers who have had the highest percentage of, or the highest ratio of non-COVID related layoffs and benefits paid out during the last 3 years. So to bring you to the real world.
The short of that last statement was the bottom 20 groups, the employers that have the poorest experience rating.
Yes, those.
Okay.
Exactly. Okay. Thank you. That's a much easier way to say it.
Okay.
So the real world examples here, what I've done is just assumed employees earning $14,100 plus. Obviously, real life is more complicated than this. But what I've done is for 1 employee, 5 employees, and 10 employees. And if you remember, roughly 78% of Vermont private sector employees have 10 or fewer employees in their workforce. And so what we look at here in the first column is rate class 0 at Schedule 1. And then in the second column, it's rate class 0 at Schedule 5. So for just the 1 employee at Schedule 1, you're looking at $56.40 in UI contributions on that taxable wage base. If you go up to Schedule 5, that more than triples.
Sorry, Damien, is that per year or per quarter?
This is your annual UI contributions here. So this is assuming that you have $14,100 or more in annual wages, and that we're at this rate schedule for the year. Senator Rom.
Representative Rom?
I just went to go find the latest projections on the cost of the dependent benefit from Joyce, and the email I have, I can, you're not on it, Damien, so I'm just realizing that. It has Department of Labor's new cost estimate at 21.5 million.
So,
Okay.
so we're not, Senator Ron, we're not anywhere near that yet. We're just trying to understand what the contribution changes might be.
Oh,
And we're
I
looking,
thought it was baked in
I
the
know I know it's on the screen,
Okay.
but we're
Okay.
really focused on the bottom column now. And before we go on, Damien, you had an important thing is you had asked the commissioner if he knew what percentage of employers are in the zero rate class or employees. I remember Cameron saying something like 45% of all employers. I don't know if that's
It's a huge number. I thought it was actually even higher than that, that it was over 50%.
I don't know. Do you know that, or are we gonna we'll can wait?
I think Cameron just joined us.
Okay.
I believe, Mr. Chair, that it is over 50%. I will try to get that exact number for you real quick.
Thank you very much.
Yeah, it's high.
Okay. So this is probably the most common situation we're dealing with. At least 50% of the employer community would see their rates impacted by this change. So if you're a small, and you said 90% of the businesses have 10 or less people, or 80?
78.
78%. It's roughly 90% of Vermont private sector employees have 20 or fewer than 20. I can't remember which of those it is, but it's 78% have fewer than 10 employees.
Right.
So
I think one of
this
this says for me, and this is not the complete picture, is that, and I think it depends what lens you're looking at, but even for a business like this that is going through, going with no change in the law, their added costs would be about $1,200, $1,300. And depending upon the lens you look at, that's not a huge change compared to all the other problems they're facing. And another lens might be that is a huge change, but it depends, how you view it. I don't think there's a definitive answer, but I think it's important for the committee to see the size of the relief we're projecting. This is only one of the suggestions for relief, but this is the primary one, certainly in the first year. So anything more you want to say on this, Damien, or questions? This is new to the committee, but.
Yeah, the only thing I would add to this is there is another proposal in the bill that holds the taxable wage base down at 14,100 for an extra year. And I didn't project out the savings per employer on that, but that would also potentially impact that because that, again, in next fiscal year, that's a small change on this tax bill. But again, it would be adding a little bit more burden for the employers there. So that's another thing to just keep in mind about this bill, is this reflects just the tax rate savings, not the small additional savings baked in by holding the taxable wage base down as well.
Right. So the numbers would be a little bit bigger in terms of the savings we're proposing if we did the taxable wage based freeze as well.
Yeah, and the taxable wage base freeze, Matt indicated that that's about 3 million statewide. So if you actually, I guess for those of you who have the charts open on another screen, if you look at the calendar year reductions at the top, you'll see that it's a factor of 10 or more smaller than what it's a small proportion of those annual calendar year savings that are shown in the top, because that bakes in freezing the tax rates at Schedule 1, limiting them to Schedule 3, and then holding the taxable wage base down for an extra year. And that shows you sort of the total impact for those years short term. And again, as Matt mentioned in his presentation, because of the way the tax rate schedule shifts out, they end up seeing higher contributions in out years, but in the short term during the recovery here, this is what we're seeing for savings in terms of contributions in the short term.
Okay. So that's a good segue. I hope that was helpful a little bit to the committee to get a sense of the scope.
Just a question regarding the scope. When we talk about the savings to businesses by these various mechanisms, is it correct, though, that the net amount or the total amount that they will pay in the 10-year period is unchanged?
My understanding from Matt's presentation, and he's with us now, so he can add a little bit more to this, is that essentially over the 10-year period, we're going to be in a very similar place at the end of 10 years with this projection versus business as usual. This is just shifting those payments out.
Yeah, it's shifting the date of the payment. So in terms of when we talk about savings in the short run for businesses, we're talking about what essentially is a loan, not a gift that results in actual money that they can keep by way of savings, because the total amount of money that they have to pay in order to make the unemployment fund whole to where we want it to be is essentially unchanged. Is that correct?
My understanding is that is essentially correct. I heard Matt say several times that there was a $10 million difference if you went out 10 years. And I don't know if you went out 12 years, whether even that $10 million would also be recovered.
Michael, may I ask a question? Two Michaels. Michael S. This is assuming the statute that may have been onerous, as we are now acknowledging, perhaps more onerous on employers than we had anticipated. And do we actually need a trust fund of $1 billion? Is it not possible to I don't want to say not worry about, but to forgive that expectation that they have to make it up? I mean, that there, can we somehow make it so that this is in fact just means that we're going to get to $1 billion further down the line? I mean, is there a need for us to get to $1 billion as fast as this schedule has us getting there? And so that's an assumption we're operating on. Can we step back from that and in fact let that just go forward without having, as Randy is talking about it, as a payback? But I mean, is there a way we can, do you understand my question?
I totally understand your question. I've even suggested the same. I think that, in my mind, should probably be part of a total overhaul of this structure, which will take some time. I'm more focused on the temporary situation, but certainly if the committee wanted to do that, you could write this law to say that here are the savings in the first 3 years and they shall not be recaptured under the formula. So you revert to the formula as if these changes had never been made and the tax rates go in that direction. I think there's going to be many changes going forward on this as we see what happens on the federal level and as we see how the trust fund evolves. But that is an option. It wouldn't be my first choice, but it is an option.
Well, I've got a question just regarding the amount in the trust fund, the target of getting to 1 million. Who decided that? Where did it come from? Is it in effect an actuarial estimate, or is it something the department came up? What's the origin of these numbers to begin with?
Go ahead, Damien.
So the trust fund going up to 1 billion is based on the way the formula is set up. And it looks back 10 years. And the problem that we're facing is that it takes the unprecedented downturn from the pandemic
Mhm.
into that projection, developing and Matt can certainly speak to this more fluently than I can, but it's because of the size of the downturn for the pandemic, that's part of what's driving us up to that $1 billion number.
That's what I'm
And
saying.
Matt's with us here, so.
Yeah, and whether or not we have what essentially is almost an artificial increase up to that number that is beyond what we really anticipate we need. We recognize at the same time, though, we could have another pandemic tomorrow that could effectively push us in another direction. But I agree with you, Michael, that we really need to, I think, step back after this short term is over and just review how we come up with these numbers in the first place.
Well, they're part of the grand bargain.
This historically, and the commissioner could correct me, or Matt could correct me, or wrong, when we were doing the grand bargain, the trust fund was in fairly good shape in 2008. I think it was hovering around $250 million or 300 million, and it plummeted to go briefly negative, and we made all those adjustments. But at that point, and times have changed, but at that point, I think people were looking at 300 million as a healthy trust fund. And when it got to 500 million before the pandemic, I heard over and over again that we had the healthiest trust fund in the country, which is good news and bad news. If you were part of the grand bargain, you might say, boy, we really did our job and we did it well. We're in great shape. On the other hand, the business community and workers might have said, you went too far. You made us pay too much in taxes and you cut too much in benefits. And I think it's time for another revisit of that. What we're not going to spend a lot of time debating this back and forth. I think we know where
Not today.
people stand. I just feel like we need to do a temporary fix here, and I want to help both sides. So
let me just ask on the issue of helping both sides. We've said that with this proposal, we will be effectively doing a lending program for employers because they have to make up the difference. In terms of the proposals for the benefit increase, is that permanent?
the dependency one, the smaller one is permanent. The other one is just 1 year.
The increase by 20% is solely for FY22, correct?
Correct.
And then it reverts back.
Correct. Or it disappears. Yeah, reverts back. No 20% increase. So let's, as a segue, Damien, why don't you talk about the other parts of the chart at this point?
Sorry, forgot to turn off mute. So the chart here, just the pieces that we're looking at the top, the figures at the top reflect the calendar year differences between the base and then both the committee and the administration's proposals, which are the same on holding down the tax rates at Schedule 1 in FY22, limiting them to Schedule 3 in FY23, and holding the taxable wage base at 14,100 for calendar year 2022. And so this was the difference in contributions for those 3 calendar years shown that on Matt's chart from right before we left on break. And again, as Senator Brock mentioned, as you go out, the difference shifts, and that money is essentially recovered by the trust fund just in later years. The benefit increase projections here are, so there are 3 separate proposals that are currently on the table. The first is to increase the weekly benefit amount formula for FY22. And Matt's estimate on this is that it's about 18 to 20 million. And then to increase the max weekly benefit in FY 2022 is about 13 to 17 million. So that's increase the 531 by 20%, and that to somewhere over 600. I can't do the math that fast, but it's 630 something, I think. And then the third proposal on the table is to provide the $50 weekly supplemental benefit to claimants that have 1 or more dependent children. And this is again for FY 2022. There is a footnote here just noting that the current proposal would essentially make that dependent benefit permanent. And there also has been a proposal to have I think a 5-year repeal on that was in some earlier language.
Damien,
One
do you
note on the
have any
projection.
idea that if the benefit increase projections were to come about, would that have any impact under the way the formula is calculated about what the amount that we should have in the trust fund by 2031 would be?
I don't know the answer to that off my head. I assume that it would, but Matt Barowitz is really the person to talk about that.
Right. The second question I have is, if you look at the amount of the projections and the difference between JFO and the Department of Labor, one is double the other. And I just mentioned for the committee, I would like to understand why there is such a radical difference in which the Department of Labor calculates essentially we'd spend twice what JFO says we would spend in that area.
I appreciate that question. I was going to get to that, Senator Brock.
Okay.
We could have Matt and Joyce come in and describe that, but as a first shot, I'd like to have Damien, if you feel prepared, the differences involved. I think it has to do with assumptions on how many people will be unemployed during that period. And I think as a footnote, it should have probably been in here that these numbers on both sides, I think, are projected to go down somewhat in each of the out years, as I think they both project the economy to recover more. So whether it's $15 million or $28 million in 1 year, it'll be less in the future years by a small amount. But if we can get Joyce in, and we have Matt here, but if you want to take a stab at what Damien, and that may be sufficient.
I think I don't know enough about the discussions between Matt and Joyce to know where the differences are. I'm just receiving the email that Joyce forwarded to the committee members about the cost estimate. So I think there are some differences in the assumptions and projections they're using, but beyond that, I just don't feel prepared to really weigh in on the differences here. My understanding is that there may have been some movement in the numbers, but I don't actually even know where they've ended up after their further talks. These were the numbers that I had available when I made the chart. So,
okay, that's fine. I don't want to get too much into the details and weeds here, but Matt, can you try and give an objective? I know I guess both feel kind of strongly on your numbers, and neither of you, I haven't seen the last stuff, so maybe there is some narrowing, but last I had heard, you had a very amicable conversation with Joyce and you agreed to disagree. So if you could objectively, very quickly state where you see the differences lie as to why the numbers come up differently. I really don't want to spend a lot of time just yet on this. Thank you, Matt.
Good,
Well,
good morning. For the record, I'm Matthew Bearwitz, Director of the Economic Labor Market Information Division with the Vermont Department of Labor. And that is what I'm here to do, is provide objective information. I've been with 3 administrations, 5 commissioners, and I'm here to just report on the numbers. Joyce and I did have a good discussion. If you look, I will say first and foremost, Damien was not included on the email that Joyce shared later. So the revised fiscal year 2022 estimate from the Vermont Department of Labor would be 21.5 million. So that does walk it back a little bit. If you look at Joyce's forecast from fiscal year 22, 23 to 24, you'll see it's basically a flat line. And in essence, in conversations I guess she's had at JFO, they believe that by July 1st, we're going to be back to regular economy. And as you've seen in my projections for the trust, which is totally possible, the vaccination rates, the take-up rate for our rehires could get us right back there. And there's no one in this room who would disagree. Wouldn't that be the best outcome? But as you've seen in my unemployment insurance trust fund, as I'm trying to be a steward for the trust fund itself, I forecasted a high level of unemployment insurance benefits this year, less high next year, but still an elevated level. We're down about 30,000 jobs overall, and we need to replace those to get back to a point of full employment. And so my first year of fiscal year 2022 uses more current levels of benefits, walking with some improvement, as opposed to a sharp V return, like a V recovery in the economy, which is more what Joyce has, as you can see with her level projections for the next 3 years. Mine is a step down, saying that the first year is going to be a little bit tougher. We still have some ways to go. I think, as Senator Rahm has pointed out in some of the Washington Post and other articles going on about the economic disruption associated with reemployment, I don't see it as a smooth return back to normal.
thank you. Just, Matt, do you have or can you, like in the next, as you think this through, going back to Senator Brock's point, I just want to understand the numbers involved. If we were to, after I can visualize your bar graphs where in the out years, the employers are paying more than if we left the law alone right now. If we accumulated those differentials for those 3 or 4 years, how much further would we have to, how much further would the trust fund suffer in terms of hundreds of millions of dollars or whatever? That's what I'm trying to get at. In other words, if this was not a loan, but this was a one-time relief, I'm sure it may take some work, but I've been part of this in the past. It can be done. You can write the law in a way to accomplish whatever you want. So I'm just looking for the number in the 10 years. How much would, if it wasn't a loan, but was a straight benefit to employers, how much would the trust fund suffer as a result of that?
I guess I don't fully understand the question. If you mean like dollar for dollar, if you're saying that, you know, this would be a savings, a direct relief to employers now, and it would be artificially kept down and the trust fund wasn't allowed to adjust, it would, I guess you could make it dollar for dollar if that's what you're saying.
127 million, in other words.
Whatever, if you're saying you can write the law, I guess there's a lot of conversations going on here, and there's a lot of opportunities that I really wanted to jump in, specifically related to the long-term, the impact, or redoing the entire trust fund modeling, because there are ways to adjust how we say this $1 billion is in essence 2.5 times the worst year we've had in the last 10 years. And as we said, we had this terrible year that we have in our rearview mirror, and 2.5 times that worst year is pretty close to $1 billion. So we're talking in round terms. If we said, let's take an average of the worst 2 years in the last 10 years, that reduces the criteria to get to Schedule 1. And really what we're talking about is to get to Schedule 1 is would take that down to 600 million. So there are very small changes that could be made to say, hey, we don't need to get to $1 billion because we understand the model and we understand the economic situations around us, and we know what we should have on hand to be just prudent.
Thank you very much for that. That really, I think, helps base us in reality on the bigger picture. I guess I feel like, I still feel like the helping everybody is important in this context where we have these funds, and I read articles that with the federal dollars, we're in a once in a lifetime situation of how great things are. And yet we're struggling to reach a consensus here as to how we can help everybody. Let's see what time it is, 10 o'clock. Do any committee members have any comments or questions? I'm just assuming the answer to my last question is if we're saving, maybe I'm being too simple. If we're saving, and I'm not saying I'm in any way there yet, Senator Brock, but if we're saving $127 million to the business community that you're portraying, they're going to have to pay back over the years, short of $10 million that Matt said, that if we could somehow alleviate that $127 million debt, that is what we would have to find. And I assume similarly, that would be the shortfall in the trust fund, which would still be way above the 600 million that Matt just talked about. So,
yeah, I mean, it's just really the validity of of understanding the methodology we're using to try to determine what's the right amount for the trust fund. And that's what I'm less concerned about the mechanism than I am about what's the right number.
Mm-hmm.
What's the right number to provide the degree of protection that we need, both in our best estimate and also in sort of our worst case estimate over the next 10 years. That's what I'm really looking for.
Yes. And I think, let me say this.
Matt,
I think that question is of critical importance. I thought Matt just answered it, but
Matt just answered it, I thought.
But
Well, he
try
gave
that
an answer, yes, and I'm still digesting it.
okay.
I'd be happy to add to that conversation. I mean, the federal government provides us no guidance they provide us recommendations. We would like to see you have this much, but states can do what they choose. So as soon as you drop into a borrowing situation, the federal government's going to step in and say, hey, we're going to make you have a positive balance. Then it becomes up to us. And if you think about like a household budget, what is your rainy day fund? You look at your expenses and you say, I want a couple of months on hand for your rainy day fund as a household. And it's the same conversation here. We can take a look, and maybe 2.5 times the worst year isn't appropriate, because don't forget, you got contributions coming in still too, right? So if you still have contributions coming in, and when we used to talk about adequacy in a pre-pandemic, we would talk to getting to Schedule 3. Schedule 3 was always kind of like the barometer, because if we needed more, we could start collecting more. If we needed less, we could collect less. So what the conversation seems to have focused on this $1 billion is what happens when you get to Schedule 1. So the conversation has shifted from being at Schedule 3 to Schedule 1. We could talk about scenarios about how much we think an outlay for benefits in a year would be, and how many do we want 1.5 times that? Is that appropriate? 2.5 times? But this is the art of it as opposed to the science.
But it would seem to me that this is almost a parallel to what we do to determine pension payout, although there's the uncertainty of how many people are going to be alive at various points in time to collect pension benefits. But this is an actuarial problem, isn't it? And we're kind of pulling numbers out of the air on the basis of our best guess. You think about the methodology we're using, we're guessing. And I'm not sure that there's the logic behind our guesses. That's my concern.
Yep.
Well, I guess my response to that would be, you're right, but the way it's structured now, my understanding is there are guesses that are made that if they don't pan out, that every year we're automatically adjusting to our miscalculation. So we have these governors built in there to make sure that we don't fall into a problem area. And I think what I'm hearing is that the governors we have on this now are really there to they were there to get us to Schedule 3. Now we're talking about Schedule 1, which means even a more solvent, healthier trust fund. And I guess it depends on how conservative you want to be.
Well, I guess what we want to do is we just want to figure out what's based on our best guess, and it is a guess, which is the essential element of risk management of this type. What can we survive? We have a best guess as to what we think is going to happen economically over the next several years. In the event that we had another pandemic or an extension of the pandemic that we have now for another year, will we have enough money to deal with it? Should we add another possibility of something that would affect our economy, again, adversely? And then
Senator Brock, one of the things that's in the bill we haven't really talked about again or revisited, I don't know that we're going to have time to it, is another adjustment or check of threatening the trust fund. You recall the number $90 million. There's a provision in the bill that says if it's estimated that the fund's going to go below $90 million in December, none of these things will go forward. Instead, it will be saying we can't afford to implement them. So it's a balance. I mean, I understand your conservative approach. I'm with you in part, but I hate to see money in the bank where people are kept in the bank, where people are struggling and businesses are struggling, and we can make these temporary fix. I like this bill because it helps both people, and I think we can afford it. So.
Keisha has a question.
Well, a few things. Is it okay, Mr. Chair? Are we good?
I'm sorry.
No, it's okay. So one, for Senator Brock's sake and others, just in case Joyce Manchester is listening in and sort of hearing the discussion and stays, has been doing a lot of work behind the scenes with DOL to sort of shore up these numbers and see where there are different assumptions. And I feel like it's valuable to us that we're getting two, opinions on what numbers we're assuming, make sense where. So I think, and Joyce has offered to join us if we want that, or Senator Brock, if you wanted to talk to her separately as well. Two, I feel like I just keep hearing us talk about, the sacrifice that businesses will make down the road for, shoring up the trust fund in the future. We have a strong safety net in Vermont that both employers and employees pay for, in my mind. It's a shared sacrifice to say, we as Vermonters tend to accept lower wages, but know that we take care of each other and that we'll get through these things together. And I still see, a future where we're going to have potentially more depressed wages to help make up for, what we're trying to do right now to hold people together. And Senator Brock, if we, have a future downturn, I would rather know that we gave people some money right now, so that we know that with the stimulus money, some people save it because they know there are more hard times to come, and we haven't given people that much money in stimulus. We know that it was already a percentage of a wage that's fairly low to begin with across the country, that the unemployment money they were getting is not, as much as we all hope to make in our lifetimes, to be in good shape, right? Our commissioners make about $130,000 or more each year. There are raises, in our legislation for the governor, for our statewide constitutional officers. We're still trying to give people raises who work for state government at the highest levels and all decision-making levels, while, we're telling people, well, in this downturn, you're the one who loses out the most, even though we have this trust fund because you and your employer have been, building a safety net together. So I just feel like it's a shared sacrifice that everyone's been making. And if we don't give people what we can now on this very rainy day, what hope do they have for the next time this comes around? So that's what I would say there. I also was hoping at some point we might learn what it means for the taxable UI benefit issue that passed in this latest stimulus proposal. I think I learned that the first $10,000 of unemployment will not be taxed at the federal level. And do we tag onto that? And are we going to see some sort of fiscal impact, or is that just appropriations and finance that are looking at that?
Well, we're dealing with that in finance. There's a bill coming over from the House in terms of the taxability of the PPP grants and loans and forgiveness. And this will be no doubt part of the discussion. We're a very small part of the discussion. The feds make the decision for 90% or more of the taxability. A lot of these benefits probably wouldn't be taxable anyhow because people are of such low income. But we generally link up to what the federal government does. It's a sore point for me because I think it takes away our authority to set tax policy. We do have that opportunity, but it becomes very hard not to link up when it's imposed retroactively. It causes all kinds of amended returns and things like that. So I can't give you a definitive answer, but that finance is looking at it, and I'm sure UI benefits as well as other incomes will be looked at. My understanding is that in the House, on the big issue of PPP loans, of which there are over $1 billion, that they will not be taxable they're not taxable at the federal level by federal law, and they won't be taxable at the state level either for calendar year 2020. It's being put on hold, the decision for taxable year 2021, where actually probably the majority of the forgiveness will take place. So, and it's not taxable. It's been decided by the feds that it's not taxable for 2021 either, but it will have I think we've been told somewhere between $6 and $10 million loss to state revenue if we make them non-taxable at the state level as well.
It's H315 that passed the House and is currently in appropriations in the Senate.
Right. Yeah, it was a separate bill, and then it got tacked on to that fast forward bill. Yep. Joyce could fill us in. I think Matt did a pretty thorough job. My own, the issue is bigger than the number in some ways, whether it's 25 or 15, or we split the difference or 20. That, in my mind, is not going to be the issue as to whether the dependency benefit goes forward or not. So I'm glad, unless you would like to hear from Joyce, Senator Rahm, I'm going to move on. Okay. So what I'd like to do now, I mean, I guess I'm feeling like the positions are fairly set. There could be some consensus position that could evolve perhaps over the evening. The one other outstanding issue that I want to talk about before we have Damian walk through the bill and highlight the various options that are out there is I want to talk about the mainframe issue because the commissioner has raised a problem. Am I correct, Commissioner, that at this point you have no problem with the way Damian has drafted the bill to approximate the 20%, not on the substance, but basically changing the divisor number of weeks or changing the cap number? That's something you do. You can do any year. That's not the issue. It's more the dependency benefit.
Yeah. So again, I think we've said there are things that are easy and things that are hard with the mainframe. So if we stay within the confines of the calculation that's already built into the system. So if we looked at changing the maximum weekly benefit amount, which changes anyways as it indexes each year, so if the committee wanted to simply just increase the maximum weekly benefit amount, from a implementation perspective, that is very easy. If we start meddling with the calculation that we don't typically touch, that it creates much more concern on my end. We haven't even had conversations about what's actually feasible at the agency level for the Agency of Digital Services with regards to something like a brand new benefit that doesn't exist. Or I think at one point, Senator, you had said, if we wanted to do just a flat 20% across the board, we don't necessarily have a mechanism built into the system to identify a flat 20% on top of everybody's benefit and calculate that out, because everybody's benefit is different. But if we wanted to identify a flat amount or change something in the calculation that already exists, like the maximum, that could be possible. Certainly I feel much more comfortable about that than trying to devise a different mechanism.
Right. Okay. I'm with you on that. I just want to be clear, and Damien and, maybe Cameron can also weigh in. They're putting the dependency benefit aside and the challenges you're identifying there. There are two other proposals. One is the max. So if the max was next year going to 531 to 540, we could just change that number to 640 if that's close to the 20%, and that's very easy.
Yeah,
the middle one, I want to raise the benefits for everybody else by 20%. And the way that generally is calculated, people's weekly benefit amounts, is based upon a divisor of 45, I think, presently. And we've changed that divisor several times in my lifetime, I know. And I'm thinking that is not an issue either. And in the bill, we've drafted that to be 38 weeks, and that will produce roughly somewhat less than a 20% increase. But that, just want to put that aside. Is that sort of fall into the same category as raising the max?
I would turn to Cameron potentially. Like you said, if we've done it before, I'm much more confident in our ability to do that. Although I'm not the coder that works on the mainframe, so I don't want to pretend to speak like one. And neither is Cameron, but Cameron is certainly much more intimately involved in how the mainframe works.
Because I remember distinctly from 2010, we changed it for a group of people. So we actually, it was even more complicated than then. One group of people were limited to like a divisor that was a different divisor than the rest of them. But I assume that's doable. So Cameron, do you have any feel for that, or do you need to talk to somebody, or?
I will echo the commissioner. I'd want to talk to the Agency of Digital Services and see what their thoughts are. It's not something that we touch on an annual basis. So I don't know what their, where they would need to find in the code that it would need to be changed and what their concerns would be about that. I'd want to defer to them.
Okay. So that's actually a good segue into the policy discussion I want to have before we go through the bill. If this committee, in its judgment, felt that we wanted to give, let's say it wasn't even pandemic, but we just felt it was high time to raise people's benefits across the board by 5%. I am not going to sit still and say, I'm not going to do that because your machinery is incapable of doing it. So it's my position that will give you as much flexibility of how you do it, if you need it, on how to do it. You'll have several months to do it. You can make your case in the House as well, but I'm not holding up this bill because there's a mechanical problem. I felt this committee has helped the department in any number of ways throughout the process and all the difficulties that we faced, I'm not going to say we're not going to push forward on these concepts because the machinery is not there. We can send out a letter that I digged out from my files from you, Commissioner, where you asked the committee to do a $100 a week increase on behalf of the government, on behalf of the governor last summer. And there was never any mention made that it was impossible to do. You urged us to appropriate that money, and we did. We're doing something similar here. And as I said before, if we can put Rover on Mars, even if you have to set up a separate computer system to pay out these dependency benefits until you can get the mainframe started, and that costs us a few $100,000 or more to send out separate checks, I'm not going to stop the policy from going forward if this committee votes for that policy.
I would just, Mr. Chair, I think we're not comparing apples to apples. So when we talked about the $100 benefit from before, that was a limited one-time benefit to the entire population. It only lasted 5 weeks and there was no eligibility requirement. So it was literally, if you received benefits, you got the $100. So when we start talking about picking and choosing who gets a benefit and who doesn't get a benefit, that layers on a level of complication. I'll tell you, it's going to cost a whole lot more than a couple $100,000 to build a new system. It cost us way more than that to build PUA. Right now there is not funding set aside to actually achieve what you're talking about as the committee. I would also point out that I appreciate the passion and desire to get more money into Vermonters' hands, and I share that desire. I also know that we're setting ourselves up for failure here at the department. You're wanting us to promise that we can deliver on something that I think is extremely reckless in terms of how we use our technology system here that is very fragile. And in the end, if we can't pull it off, we are the ones, the department, who's going to be back before the committee saying, why couldn't you do this? We told you to do it. And I'm going to be completely frank and honest here. It worries me extremely to be talking about messing around with the mainframe when it hasn't gone a week since the pandemic started where there wasn't some situation, some fire that we were having to put out with this mainframe. And so I understand the passion of you and folks on the committee. I would love to be able to have this conversation when we talk about modernizing our mainframe. But right now, what you're doing is simply adding an extreme amount of burden onto an already overburdened department that's using a system that turned 50 years old in June and has extreme limitations on how it can be used. So again, what I'm trying to do is prevent us from being in a situation where the system fails and we can't recover it, which then wipes out our ability to deliver benefits across the board to the rest of the claimants. And that is an extreme risk. It is a risk and a concern that's been shared by both me, the administration, and the Agency of Digital Services, that our mainframe is on the verge of collapse. And so I will put that on the record because if we find ourselves back here, with many other issues related to this in the future, it is an extreme challenge and an extreme concern for me. And I think it really just sets us up in a position where we're not going to be able to deliver to the level of quality that both you expect, we want to be able to provide, and Vermonters expect. And it's setting us up for a bad situation.
I appreciate you being on the record. That's fine. My feeling, I guess, is this is a policy, especially given the number of women who are on unemployment, that is overdue. I want to see it go forward. I ask myself, if the governor told the tax department, for instance, find out from the department, or find out who, and I think there are ways to find out who has the dependents and who are on UI. I think we're talking about, I mean, you could probably tell me, I mean, the number of people we're talking about for this projection and the number of people who have, this is in Matt's and Joyce's calculation, and the number of people who have dependents. Get their addresses and send them out $50 a week. Don't go anywhere near the Department of Labor. Just set that up and give them $50 a week. I can't imagine that is so difficult.
Well, but it comes from the trust fund, which is federally regulated. So again, it's not as easy as just writing a check and sending them a check, because it comes from a federally regulated fund that sits at the US Treasury and has to meet all the different requirements and accounting purposes that go along with what is an eligible benefit under UI that can be pulled from the trust fund. So if we want to set up a totally different fund with money in it to pay people a stimulus or a benefit, then that is a much different conversation than trying to weave it into the UI statute and make it something that complies with the federal regulations for using trust fund dollars.
Right, but so if we set up a totally separate one and then did a reconciliation to have the trust fund repay that amount, we do that all the time in terms of adjustments to benefits, recoveries, back and forth. You do this with the federal government in terms of money. I'm just trying to address the mainframe issue. Can't we think creatively as a way to get these people $50? It doesn't sound all that complicated. If unless you're going to say to me right now that if you want it to be paid out of the trust fund, the only way the feds allow you to do that is through a weekly check that goes out every week, coupled
That's what I'm telling you right now. So I talked with Cameron about this yesterday, and we are in consensus that in order for it to comply with the federal requirements, it needs to be done on a weekly basis, and it has to follow the eligibility requirements put forth in someone's weekly benefit that they have to certify each week. So it can only be paid to individuals who file a weekly claim, are determined to be eligible, and that claim moves forward for payment. Only then can we then issue a benefit on top of the benefit that's already going out. So it is intimately tied to their weekly claim and their weekly benefit payment.
So we do all these benefit calculations on a weekly benefit, for instance, for people who work partially and income they bring in any week. You get that information on a weekly claim and you adjust their benefit. You're able to do that, but people can't check a box saying they have kids, and you can't add $50 to their check because the mainframe will explode.
Well, up until last March, we couldn't add an email address to someone's account in the mainframe. Okay. So when you're talking about simplicity and complexity, yes, that is correct.
Okay, so we can't really change anything in this program other than things that are already like the maximum benefit that are already in the system. Our hands are tied. We had a policy crisis. There's nothing we can do without spending a fortune to set up you're saying we can't even do a separate kind of system. My understanding was that that's exactly what you did with the other $100, and maybe it's apples and oranges because it wasn't trust fund dollars.
Well, the other $100 was tracked on a spreadsheet, and no offense, but we saw how that turned out with the 1099s at the end of the year. So I'm trying to stay as far away from managing things manually by individuals as much as possible, so we don't find ourselves back in a situation like we were in January. So with the 1099s. So, we can build brand new systems. We did that with PUA. creates an added burden on the claimant because they would have to file then in 2 different programs. So they'd have to file under UI, and then they would have to file for a dependent benefit in a different software and a different program altogether, which is what they have to do with PUA. But again, like I said, it costs us much more than $100,000 or $200,000 to build the PUA system so that it complies with the federal government. And we would have to figure out where that funding is coming from to build that system.
So, Michael, how can we leverage the investment you've made in the PUA system here? I mean, you've just spent a bomb having a whole new system established for a new benefit that came from the feds. How can we use that to help us here?
I don't think the PUA system is a throwaway system. There are other issues, that we are still issues in the sense that we're still actually building the PUA system. So it's not finished. It doesn't meet all the federal requirements. My concern though would be that, if you wanted this benefit to happen in July, that runway is extremely short when you're talking about building a system to pay a benefit. I would turn to our folks and our friends at ADS to say, what is the possibility of utilizing that system? But again, like I said, it may be that the claimant then has to file in 2 separate places, right? So they have to file in the mainframe through our original claimant portal, which is the UI claimant portal. And then they might have to set up an account in a different system and file in a different system for a dependent benefit, an additional.
Right, but they did that for PUA. So thousands and thousands of people did it successfully for PUA.
So they did it once. So the problem would be that, or not problem, I guess the issue is just that their weekly benefit that they're filing in PUA is only through one system, right? So they did have to file once and fill out 2 applications, one for the mainframe for the base initial claim. And then when we determined them to be PUA eligible, they filled out a PUA application. But when they file their weekly claim benefit, they fill out just one, and that is in the Salesforce application. In this case, we would have to figure out how to have them file both for regular UI through the UI claimant portal, and again through a different system that is outside of the mainframe. And again, so that just becomes, the more we can automate it, the more, it does create it does obviously create more administrative burden. We had to add staff to be able to administer the PUA program. It's likely we would have to add staff to administer an additional benefit because there's a full accounting effort that happens on the back end in terms of pay files and validating pay files and positive pay files that go to the bank, and then confirming that, and then being able to account for all the money that went out in benefits at the end of the year. So we are also talking about probably adding additional staff to be able to administer an additional benefit.
Have you kept the PUA staff, the additional PUA staff?
Yes. Yeah, so they're still on because we are still receiving federal money to run that program. So we do have additional staff that are dealing just with PUA administration.
So I think we sort of beat this one as far as we're going to go. I just would say that I, for one, am not prepared to let go of this benefit. I'm certainly willing to. I know we went through this early on when we had all the delays and all the phone problems. We kept begging the department to hire more staff. We would pay for it. If it's a question of getting some additional administrative dollars, I'm in favor of that. I'm also in favor of the PUA benefit is going to probably end Labor Day. I could see establishing this benefit in July with the authority to the commissioner to postpone that for 3 months if he needs more time to set his system up. There's the House to deal with this to make the case, but I remain unconvinced that where there's a will, there's a way, and it frosts me that the legislature can be handicapped by a machine. So we're gonna move on to the bill itself at this point. And Damian, could you pull up what you see as the last draft? So this is probably a draft where I incorporated a lot of the proposals. I think all of the proposals that we've had thus far. We're just going to go through it in the next half hour. I'm not, I'm hopeful that there still could be some consensus reached here, but I'm not necessarily counting on it. But we'll at least be ready tomorrow to vote on a proposal. So, Damian.
Thank you. So the draft that I'm gonna share with you here is possible amendments. There is also some language that I've worked on for the chair and for Senator Rahm. And when I get to those sections, I will just switch between documents here, assuming that it's okay to share all of that language with the committee.
Yep.
Okay, great. So let me share my screen, and I will forward all of these documents to the committee as soon as we're done here.
And as you go through this, let's bypass the first issue of the sunset provisions and just go to the contributions and benefit provisions if you can.
That was my plan as well. So the first proposal that we've got here, this is the this is the benefits provision here in the statute. On line 11 here, what we're looking at is, so right now your weekly benefit amount is determined by dividing your 2 highest calendar quarters by 45. This would change the divisor to 38, which is roughly a 20% increase in the benefits, provided that it doesn't exceed the maximum weekly benefit amount, which we adjust down below. Just below this is the first dependent benefit proposal that was put
David,
out, which is...
Before you leave the first issue, just to hammer it home, this is the issue that Cameron's going to look into, whether the formula in the mainframe, which is now at 45, if you change that to 38, it's going to crash the computer or not.
So the second piece here in subdivision 2 is the addition of a dependent benefit. This original proposal here is a $25 or 5% of the individual's weekly benefit amount, whichever is greater, for each dependent. And it defines dependents as individuals, children who are under 18 years of age, under 24 years of age, and a full-time student, or 18 years of age and older and unable to earn wages in employment because of a physical or mental condition. So that is the first proposal. Senator Rahm has, let me just.
So, sorry,
There you
that's
go.
different from our $50 flat fee. That is what
And
goes back to
that's what
we
we're looking at now
about.
is, if I can continue, please.
Sorry.
So that's okay. So Senator Rahm's alternative proposal simplifies that considerably. So it is a flat $50 weekly allowance if the individual receiving benefits has 1 or more dependent children under 18 years of age. So dependent has a shortened definition. It's just dependent children under 18 years of age. And the benefit is a flat $50. And so this language would just drop in place of that other dependent benefit language. Are there questions on that?
And
Okay.
that's what Joyce and Matt's projection was based on, is this simplified, narrow version, correct?
That is correct.
Yes, the one that was sent to Damien and the committee about 45 minutes ago or something.
Mr. Chair, could I ask a clarifying question?
Absolutely.
This came up yesterday in talking with Cameron, and just curious where the committee is at with this language. We do have households where both adults or parents are collecting benefits. So is this a per household or per individual filing, and where they would both be claiming a dependent benefit at the same time?
Whatever easier for you, Commissioner.
All right, just didn't know if you had any.
Yeah,
It's a good question. I think we need to clarify that, but I would say that it probably, my feeling on this, and I think Senator Rahm's feeling is we wanted to make this change as simple as possible with the least amount of input of new information. And so while I was joking, I was part serious. If it makes a difference, even if it hurts the household, I'm okay with it. So.
And I do appreciate you working to simplify the language. So thank you very much.
You're welcome.
Yep. The one thing I would add is right now it's drafted as per individual. I've seen the language in other states that says if another individual in the household is already collecting this benefit, this section doesn't apply or something to that effect. If this language stays in, Commissioner, could you or Cameron let me know which is easier for the department to administer so that I can add the language or not, as the case may be? So the next piece here we're looking at is the maximum weekly benefit amount. And this would set it at $605 plus the amount of any dependent benefit allowance. And then it would allow the weekly benefit amount, it would set it to 68% of the state average weekly wage, which is determined later in the section. So I believe $605 is 68% of our current state average weekly wage. I would invite Matt to correct me if I am incorrect about that, but that was the intent here, is to set that at 68%, which is roughly a 20% increase in the maximum
So
benefit.
Just to be clear, so there's no confusion, even though we're striking out 425, that is not the current maximum benefit amount. That was the amount like 10 years ago, and it's been adjusted up to 531. So the increase would be, well, it looks like significantly less than 20% increase. I don't know.
Yeah.
65.
I'm seeing that math too. So I'll touch base with the department if this language stays in to get the actual 20% of the state average weekly wage. And that may just, if that number is incorrect, we can chalk it up to the fact that I'm not a mathematician or economist. So.
Yeah, 20%, it would sort of take it up to more like
530 something or 630 something. Yeah.
630, 641.
Right.
641.
Right.
See, I told you I'm not a mathematician or economist. So anyway, though, the intent here is to raise that by 20%, and it would set it at 68%. The next section here.
Sorry. Before we leave that, may I ask a question? Just quickly, it goes up every year, doesn't it? It goes up. How does it go up every year? Because I assume it goes up every year.
So it increases. Right now, it's set to increase each July, the first calendar week of July, to an amount equal to 57% of the state average weekly wage. This would change that to 68%.
Got it. Okay, thanks. So it's what we were dealing with before is 57% of the current.
Just so you know, it is scheduled to go to 550 in July on its own.
Thank you. And just to remind the committee, I assume this will come forward in the effective dates or the implementation dates, is that this change would only be for fiscal year 22. And then it would revert to existing law.
So the next piece here brings us to the repeals. So the original proposal had reverting in fiscal year 22 to the original divisor, and this should show also a reversion to the state average weekly wage calculation of 57%. And so that would revert it back. That reversion for the maximum benefit was inadvertently omitted in this draft, so that would be included in the final committee draft. And then the next piece here was an elimination of the dependent benefit 5 years out. And so this language here would strike that dependent benefit 5 years out. Again, there's a mistake in the language at the bottom here with the amount showing the 605 because the intent now is to revert that back after 1 year. And then Senator Rahm's language, we haven't discussed repeal on that. My understanding is that one of the options is either a 1-year repeal or to make it permanent or to do a 5-year repeal like this. So there are 3 options on the table. And then, so this right now, this language here in front of you was drafted as a 5-year repeal.
While we're talking about it and talking about the possibility of the amendment as a permanent change, if we, I know that the commissioner hasn't weighed in about which is easier, the per household or per individual for the benefit. But if it's per household, that estimate should be even lower that we have from both JFO and from the Department of Labor, because they did it based on individuals who have dependents. So I imagine it's a lower calculation overall.
Yeah.
Okay. So the next piece, just because we're talking about that provision, I want to show you the contingent effective date. So the effective dates here, Section 5, July 1, 2021. Section 6, the repeal of the increased benefits, July 1, 2022. And then Section 7 here was the repeal, a 5-year repeal on the dependent benefit. Again, as I mentioned, there are 2 other proposals. One is to include it in the 1-year repeal, and one is to make it permanent. The final piece here was to say that these sections would not take effect at all if the balance of the UI trust fund is either below 90 million or projected to drop below that amount on or before December 31, 2021 as of April 15th of this year. And that's to make the contingency here consistent with the contingency on the rate relief. The idea being that if you're going to avoid reducing contributions, you should also avoid reducing additional payouts from the trust fund if it looks like it's going to put the trust fund into distress. Questions on that?
Yeah, I hesitate to open up section 4, subsection 4 here. I know the last time we talked about this, Cameron had said he was working, I think with Damien, on some wording as opposed to a number. I had raised the question of whether the $90,000 was enough protection, 90 million was enough protection. So we're going to break pretty soon because we have to go to another bill, but I'm going to ask Cameron or the commissioner to work with Damien on their latest thoughts on this section. I want there to be some protection. I'm not sure 90 million is enough. Quite frankly, we're a month away from April 15th. So they probably know the answer to that question already. You know, is there some alternative date we can put in there, an alternative number? And we have, you know, we could have a secondary thing on the, potentially on the, if we pass the dependency benefits on that going forward, and also on the subsequent rate relief of going to Schedule 3 for the next year, and we could take another look on April 15th, 2022. I don't know if that is at all clear to the committee at all, but of what this is trying to accomplish. But there are moving things that are happening in the future, and we'll have more information as we go forward. And I seriously doubt, knowing what we know about the trust fund now, that this section will ever come into play. But to have $90 million and one extra dollar in the trust fund on December 31st, I don't know how long that's going to last. For instance, if the pandemic continued, and in that case, whether we can afford any of this. So, if that's okay with the committee, I'd like to have the Cameron probably be in touch, because he said he was working on some alternative at one point on this section with Damien. And maybe, Damien, if you have the time, I really apologize for all the time we're sucking up of your life. Could you send something out about your conversations with Cameron tonight or something, so we can get a head start on this tomorrow?
Absolutely.
Okay. Any further questions at this point? I want to go to, I think what is up next is 79.
That's
Rate relief.
62.
62, then 79, right? Okay.
I thought
Anything
that
else?
was what you were asking.
I appreciate everybody's time and patience. Not an easy issue, obviously, but it's what we get paid the big bucks for, right? So let's move forward. Thank you, Commissioner Cameron, Matt. And we're going to go on to, well, I don't know that we have David Hall yet, do we?
No, because we're just ahead of schedule a tiny bit.
Let's take a break till 11.
Okay, great.
Mr. Chair, can I say one?
Yes, quick, let's go.
So I just want to say, for full transparency, I have a meeting with Deputy Commissioner Degree and members of Digital Services at 5 p.m. to talk about the mainframe and go into deeper detail about what their issues are. And so I just want to name that for the committee in case anybody wants to forward me questions or thoughts on what other states do or whatever.
All I have to say is good luck with that.
Thank you.
Bye-bye.
Yeah. You know, we've been talking about it as 30 years and it's 50 years old. That's hard to believe.
Okay. Thank you, everybody. We'll see you at 11.